Hi, my name is Ben Drake. I'm the vineyard manager here at Europa Village. I got involved with this project back in 2005 and planted the vineyard in 2006. The reason I was chosen because of my extensive background here in the Temecula Valley. I've been farming wine grapes here for about 40 years. What I enjoy about Europa Village, it's my field of dreams. In other words, the Europa group allows me to do exactly what I would do to farm a vineyard for high quality. And that's what has been instilled on me, is that we want to achieve the highest quality fruit, the highest quality wines to come out of the Temecula Valley and be competitive with any wines in the world. So what we try to do is, from the very beginning when we did our land preparation, we added mulch into the soil because these granitic soils that we have are lacking in organic matter. And what that helps us with is getting uniform fruit and uniform quality. We've installed the best irrigation systems possible. We've installed monitoring systems so that we know how much water, how deep the water goes, how often we need to water, and restrict that water to achieve high quality. All the way through the process between spraying and taking care of the vines and the quality things that we do with the plantings. We've introduced high density plantings. We used to plant 450 vines to the acre. Now we're planting vines up to 968 vines to the acre. What that does is that puts less fruit on the vines to give us higher quality. We don't increase the production. As a matter of fact, with a lot of our fruit thinning that we do, we're actually dropping a majority of the fruit to achieve that high quality fruit. We may go through the same block 3 times and drop fruit. We will start early in the spring, come back in again and do another one right around veraison, which is when the fruit begins to turn color, and then do another final dropping right before we harvest in case there's any fruit that has sunburn on it. So everything that we're doing in the vineyard is trying to achieve the highest quality fruit that we possibly can. And let me try a couple pieces of fruit here just to make sure harvest is almost over. Wonderful. I think it's important when we talk about Temecula, we learn a little bit about the history and how the Temecula wine region actually got started. Back in the early 60s, the property was purchased by Kaiser Aetna from the Vales. The Vales basically were a cattle company here in Temecula. They were one of the largest Spanish land grants. It actually made up of 3 Spanish land grants. There was the Santa Rosa, which is on the west side of Interstate 15. There was Temecula, which was basically the little town area of Temecula today. And then this side of the ranch was called the Pava. And that's where basically most of the wine grapes are all grown today, is on the Pava side. There were some early plantings done in about 1965. A lot of that was done right here on this given property, and that was done by Kaiser Aetna originally, and then that land was purchased by Ely Callaway, and Ely Callaway bought some additional property and planted more grapes. The difference between what was done then and what was done today is the spacings were on what we call an 8 by 12 spacing. There was 450 vines to the acre. The vines were actually grown on their own root. In other words, what we were doing was we were buying vines when it said it was Cabernet. The Cabernet was actually a stick that they planted in the nursery. They brought them out and we planted them on their own root. There was no graft involved. Today we buy all of our nursery stock from nurseries throughout the state. And we're not only talking about varieties, we're talking about clones of varieties. There's over 50 clones of Cabernet. There's 9 or 10 clones of Grenache. And most of this wood originally came from France. And so what we've found is our climate here in Temecula, is basically the same as the Rhone region in France and of lots of areas in Italy. And that's why we have basically Grenache, a Rhone variety. Next row over is Dolcetto. That's an Italian variety. That's why we've chose certain varieties for the plantings here at Europa Village. We've also tightened up a lot of our spacings, which I believe I've gone over, But we're planting them now on a 5 by 9 spacing, which is 968 vines to the acre. That allows us to put less fruit on the vine, give us higher quality of fruit, so the vine doesn't have to work as hard to mature that fruit, put all its energy into those few pieces of fruit that it does have to mature. I think it's important when we talk about the wines of Temecula, I think it's important that we talk a little bit about where we started and where we are today. Going back a number of years in the 60s when most of these vineyards were planted, most of our wineries that were here, and there was only a handful, they were owned by individuals that had the lust to make wine and had really not the background or the education in making wines. And so a lot of our wines in the Temecula Valley were not of the quality that they are today. Everybody liked Cabernet from the Napa Valley. Is Temecula the best place to grow Cabernet? It does very well. I think there's some nice wines that are being made if they're farmed properly and the right clones are planted here. But overall, I would say, Napa Valley has a little higher quality Cabernet than what we can grow here. I think we're competing with them very, very well. The other thing that I think that's important is when we talked about where our plants came from and the quality, I think that we've been able to adjust that. You look at Europe, they've been making wines for centuries. Napa Valley for, over 100 years. And when we look at Temecula, we only started here in the 60s. So the progress that we made in this short time in finding the right rootstocks, finding the right varieties, finding the right clones, hiring the proper one, the best winemakers that we can, the scale, we've made a tremendous progress in the right direction to make quality wines. And I think the ones that have really shined is Europa, because everything that we've tried to do it the right way. Dan wanted me to go over a little bit of a educational session for you who work in the tasting room. When we first decided to plant the vineyards here at Europa, we did extensive soil testing. And the reason for that is to determine the elements that make up the soil, as well as the organic matter in the soil. We have an AdCon system out here in the vineyard that monitors the weather conditions. In other words, it allows us to make determinations on when we treat for powdery mildew. We typically use sulfur in the vineyard for powdery mildew. It's a fungus that grows on that will damage the leaves and damage the fruit. So this model that we have with the computerized monitoring system actually determines the onset of the disease. So we can get in and treat before, and then also when we need to retreat. We also have, along with that, we also have water monitoring devices that go down in the soil. They measure the soil moisture at 4 different levels in the soil every 15 minutes. There are these little metal poles that you'll see out in the vineyard. If anyone asks you, that's what they are. They're called the AdCon system. They download the data onto the internet, comes back to me in the office. We can determine when and how often to irrigate or spray. Part of our soil preparation out here was to rip, after we did all of the grading to make the ground all smooth, we came in and we applied the compost material. We put that on about anywhere from 3 to 6 inches, depending upon whether it was in the bottom or in the top of the hill. And then we ripped the ground with a D8. In ripping it, we have 3-foot long shanks. We ran them, not which the row directions were first, but the cross rip. And the second one was determined, so we got them, the deepest part is where the vines would actually be planted. So when you look at them, if the rows run north and south, the first one ran east-west, and the second one ran north-south. That helped us to mix that compost into there to improve this granitic soil and gave us some more soil moisture holding capacity in the ground. Last but not least, the lowest wire that you see, the black hose on the grapevines, that's our drip irrigation system. We irrigate each variety as an individual irrigation block. That way, if we determine that one variety needs a little less water or one that's more, some of them, typically white varieties, will water throughout the season, where reds we put on a restriction, which we call deficit irrigation. But it's all set up so that we can monitor the water and also apply the water the most efficiently. We have synagers, we have valves, and all of our drippers are self-compensating. In talking about why we grow grapes here in the Temecula Valley is our unique microclimate and the rainbow gap, which allows the coastal influence to come into this valley and change the temperatures from warm days to cool nights. And we need that change in temperature to hold the acids in the fruit to make balanced wines and quality wines. You can grow wine, make wine in Bakersfield, but they don't have our unique influence from the coast here in the valley. Elevation is important. Wine grapes can grow almost at any elevation. The higher you get, the shorter the season. Here we have a nice long hang time of fruit on the vines to allow the fruit to mature properly, and that we're not stressing out the vines trying to get the fruit to mature. So this way, by having the proper elevation, allows us to have enough sunlight and to get the vines where we have hang time to improve quality. And I think we've kind of covered our soils.
Do it again.
They're all granitic soils. They're basically from granite and very well-drained soils. The only limiting factor we have is not having enough organic matter, and that's why we spent the money in the beginning to prepare the ground properly, to get as much organic matter in there that we could. The organic matter is important because it's a very slow release nitrogen. It gives us other elements in along with it, but that's what the organisms in the soil feed to break those elements down to make them available to the plant. So if we don't have the organic matter, we're not going to have the population of organisms in the soil to keep our vines healthy, keep the soils loose, and to grow quality fruit. Well, this is our last stop, and it gives us a nice overview of the whole vineyard, kind of talk a little bit about things that we've done. We went over rootstocks and clones. The rootstocks are very important for us because they determine whether or not we're putting them in a wet area, say like the Napa Valley, or we're planting them here in Temecula where we have this granitic soil. So we determine what rootstock that we want to plant for our soil types and the conditions that we have. With being granitic soils, or typically our soils are much shallower. So we want vines and then roots that are going to go find that moisture that we apply. And also our waters, some of our waters coming from the Colorado River. So it's important that we take into determination that at some point in time we're going to have accumulations of salt. So we want rootstocks that are tolerant to salt. So originally when the vineyard was planted by Callaway down here, they didn't have any of those tools. So today we're using more modern tools to try to give us the quality that we want in the vineyard. Same thing with clone selections. Most of the Cabernet was planted here and nobody knew what clone. We weren't separating clones. Like I mentioned, we have around 50 plus clones of Cabernet. So in here we actually select them, and the clones are either by someone's name or by a number. And their selections, if they're numbers, they're typically from France, and that's how they determine those clones in France. We went over the densities of how we plant the vineyard. It's important that we plant more vines to the acre. We bring them in closer together so the vines don't have to work as hard. They have a small amount of fruit to mature. They put all their energy into that small amount of fruit to give us the wine quality that we're trying to achieve. So we're only putting on somewhere between 3 tons to 4.5 tons, and that's the max that we would like to see in the vineyard. What that does is that, again, it's the lesser the load on the vine, the higher the quality fruit. We plant cover crops. That's part of our sustainable practice. We select the cover crops that's going to improve the biomass, which is the green manure It's what we do is we grow these legumes up. In legumes, we add a bacteria in there. They fix the nitrogen in the root systems. That also adds nitrogen to our vines. When we're all through with the cover crop and we need to start doing our spray program for the spring, we will mow it down, incorporate it in the soil. That puts that nitrogen back in the soil. That gives our organisms in the soil the food that they need to sustain, to break down that nitrogen and make it available to the plant. So it's all this whole cycle that we go through all year long on trying to sustain the quality that we're trying to achieve. Canopy management. We have two systems here in the vineyard. One of them is called VSP, which is where you see all the wires in the trellis. What we're trying to do is get as much sunlight onto the fruit that we can. The fruit, when it's exposed to the sun, gives us those characteristics that we want. We want fruit flavors and not vegetable flavors. I don't want to have cooked turnips in my Morvedra. I don't want to have spinach or bell pepper in the Syrah. I want it to taste like chocolate cherries and berries. That's what I'm trying to do, and that's where we get the sunlight onto the fruit to get those type of qualities. So the vertical shoot position is a very important system for us. It's used in all of the high quality regions in the world. The second system we have for our canopy management and trellising system is called the head prune vine. It's very typical in the older regions in Europe. The Châteauneuf-du-Pape area is basically the Rhone region. So when you're looking at our Rhone wines, one of the vines or one of the wines that we produce in that Rhone style wine is Cinsault. And Cinsault has a huge cluster to it. And so what we did is we put it on that traditional way. So we were trying to follow the old traditions of how they do it in Europe with the Cinsault. And since it has a large cluster, the head prune vine has less potential spur positions to where we will put fruit on. So it limits the amount of fruit that we'll have on that vine versus growing it on the vertical shoot position. So we feel the quality, doing it that way, is another way of expressing the old world ways of doing things, as well as having the variety properly farmed. We do a lot of our cluster thinning, and we do fruit dropping, and that's how we achieve these balances. What we want is a balanced vine. We don't want to put too much fruit on it, because then we're overcropping it, the vine has to work too hard, and the quality goes away. If we put too little fruit on, then all we're doing is we're spending all of our time manipulating the canopy. We're having to cut all this growth off. So we want to balance that. We want to have enough growth on the vine and get it up to where it fills the trellis to mature the fruit, but not where it's shading the fruit. So that's an important part. And then we'll go through and we'll actually drop clusters of fruit. When we feel a vine has got too much fruit on it, we'll drop it very early in the spring. After the fruit's all set on the vine, we'll make another fruit drop, which is typically the green berry drop. So as they go through veraison, that's when the fruit begins to turn color. We'll drop part of that fruit, the ones that we don't think will catch up with the other ones. And then we'll make one more pass right before harvest, where if there was fruit that was out in the sun, we had a warm day, we got some sunburn on it, we don't want that going into the wine either. So that is where we will go through and we will actually sort some of it in the vine, and then we'll go back through once we hand pick it, goes in the winery. We will sort it again at the winery. So you can see the care and the things that we're doing to try to achieve quality. And when I went to work here at Europa Village, the whole idea here was to grow quality fruit and make quality wines. And I think we're doing everything we possibly can. We're doing probably more of that than anyone else here in the valley, and probably more than 90% of the growers in the state. So I look at this place as my field of dreams, because I've been able to do what I want to do rather than wished I could do. And the group here at Europa has allowed me to do that. So all of you should be proud on the wines that you're pouring in the winery, because everything that we've tried to do is try to do it the best way possible.